Hello everybody, Lance Sussman here. I'm actually talking to you today from Arlington, Virginia. I'm down in the Washington area at a conference on Capitol Hill, and also had some interesting meetings at the University of Maryland on the topic of early American Jewish history and theater, which is something I'm now learning about. Our topic for this week is the beginning of a 3-week discussion on Jews and Judaism in Germany during the 18th and 19th century, 18th and 19th century. The question of what was being discussed in Germany during the age of the Enlightenment, the changing political conditions of Jews in Germany, and then what plays out during the course of the 19th century. It's in Germany more than anywhere else where you get the definition of the Judenfrage, the Jewish question, which, as we all know, becomes so fateful in the Holocaust that from a certain sense, the final solution is actually a final answer from the Nazi point of view to the Jewish question. And the question evolves or devolves from are the Jews a separate nation or are they a religion, to, in the Nazi case, are the Jews a race, are they pernicious, and do they have a place at all in the new order of things that the Nazis will establish. Now, we had been discussing in our analysis of the Jews of France during the revolution there, and then even more intensely under Napoleon, the question of the relationship of Jews and Judaism to the French state. And now we shift that, moving a little bit eastward across the Rhine River into Germany, where we can ask the same kinds of questions. What will the relationship of Jews and Judaism be to the various German states, because there is no single German state until 1871. But we're also going to begin to look more internally to the Jewish experience. What happened to Jews and Judaism in Germany during all of these great debates and dislocations and developments in the 18th and 19th century that will lead to their emancipation, their enfranchisement, and ultimately, tragically, to their disenfranchisement. And if we were to continue the story, to their re-enfranchisement, as there are both Jews and Judaism again today in Germany. In fact, for many years, Germany in recent years was the fastest growing Jewish community in Europe because of Russian immigration, and remarkably the demography of Jewish Germany has been substantially, not completely, rebuilt. And I guess the question going forward into future generations is, will a new synthesis or attempt at synthesis between German, let's call it Deutschtum and Judentum, between Germanness and Jewishness, will evolve again. For many Americans, it's almost an unthinkable proposition, but the reality is it's very much on the ground and growing in Germany today. Now, the situation in Germany in the mid to late 1700s is extremely complex because Germany is loosely organized into the Holy Roman Empire, which sometimes includes and sometimes doesn't include Austrian Jews and other southern Jews, Jews living below Bavaria. In our period, the Habsburgs, obviously from Vienna, have their own multinational domain. So when we talk about Germany here, we really mean the Holy Roman Empire and the areas that would become the Germany of Bismarck in 1871. In German history, in particular, it's difficult to geographically define Germany because it changes so often. Today, there's a certain configuration to United Germany, but it does not necessarily look like, especially in the east, into the various Polish districts, what Germany has looked like historically. The Holy Roman Empire, loosely configured over 300 different political entities within it, with a weak central emperor, was different than the Habsburg Empire in that the Holy Roman Empire, which historians delight in saying wasn't holy, wasn't Roman, and wasn't an empire, was also very religiously divided, in that it was the host site of the Reformation, and the most powerful of the monarchies, the Hohenzollerns in Berlin, were devotees of the Lutheran Church. So you have a slight dominance of Lutheranism and other Protestant expressions in Germany, unlike in France, in which the majority, at least, a disestablished majority, but still a majority, are Catholic, and very much so also out of Vienna. In the Habsburgs, you have Catholics. The precedent for a religious spectrum, as opposed to a universal church, is important in understanding how the different branches of modern Judaism would play out in Germany and not elsewhere. Germany had the pattern already from the Reformation. Germany was also the host site 700-800 years earlier to the original home of Ashkenazic Jewry and Judaism, which eventually is going to migrate eastward into Poland and later into Russia. Judeo-German, the basis of the Yiddish language, develops in Germany around the year 1000. It's debatable whether it was the Rhineland or some pockets further south, but it does develop in Germany and becomes the great vehicle for Yiddishkeit. Many of our practices today, whether it's Yartzeit or a braided challah for the special bread for Shabbat, are actually practices that develop in medieval Ashkenaz and then become used widely throughout the ancient, the medieval world. Now, the center of gravity of Ashkenazic life does begin to shift in the 14th century from the German states to Poland. The Jagiellonian dynasty invites Jews to settle in the network of new towns and help build up the economy, but there is still a substantial Jewish community in Central Europe. The Jews are mostly living in villages, although the process of urbanization will quicken. And there are important yeshivot and Jewish communities in Germany and in German-speaking lands throughout. The German Jewish communities are hit very hard by the Reformation and by the Counter-Reformation in terms of redefining them as a quarantined population, the pace of anti-Semitism because of blood libels and other anti-Semitic tendencies actually intensifies in Central Europe, although there is some light. With the rise of mercantilism in particular, you begin to get a class of Jews who are quite wealthy, who serve largely at the discretion of the rulers of the individual state, and are at court, so to speak. In this sense, they are German Jews who are much like the Sephardi Jews of southwest of France, of Bordeaux and other places, that they look and talk a whole lot like their German aristocratic counterparts, but in fact remain within the Jewish community. They also serve somewhat as what are known as the Stadtlanim. Stadtlan is a kind of envoy to the general community on behalf of the Jewish community, based on their wealth and their position at court. It was not terribly secure. so that if a Jewish court Jew, a Hofjud, was in alliance with a Protestant prince, and the Protestant prince was deposed by a Catholic prince, or vice versa, the Hofjud found himself usually in a difficult place, if not actually executed, which unfortunately did happen a great deal. The Hofjuden, the court Jews, create a kind of cultural synthesis that would ultimately deepen in the latter half of the 18th century, when not only the outer style and economic function of the Hofjud would make accommodations to prevailing German culture, but the actual content of Jewish life would begin to adjust to the same. And the key player here, and the seminal figure in modern Jewish history, is Moses Mendelssohn of Dessau, who moves with his traditional teacher to Berlin in the 18th century and finds his way into philosophical circles. A very unattractive person, almost a Nazi-like caricature of what a ghetto Jew looks like. He nevertheless was brilliant and adept at philosophy. He is discovered by Gotthold Ephraim Lessing, one of the great voices of the German Enlightenment, the Aufklärung, and becomes a philosophe interested in kind of pre-Kantian philosophy in Germany. Now, the German Enlightenment, unlike the French Enlightenment, had a spiritual dimension to it, not unlike here in the United States, and questions arose as to how could Mendelssohn, the rationalist, the deist, reconcile his persistence in Judaism with the prevailing philosophies of the day, which in some people's minds meant that he should do the reasonable thing and become a Christian. Mendelssohn, who was mostly interested in just being a philosopher, felt compelled to push back, and in so doing becomes the spokesman of intellectual and cultural Judaism in Germany and beyond. He will address himself to religious questions, particularly Judaism recast in a deistic framework, leading to a bifurcated view of Judaism, that Judaism is both the most rational of all religions and has a revelatory basis for its ritual life. He will learn to develop vigorously for the separation of church and state, actually more like the American system than the French system. He does believe in cultural accommodationism, and that Jews who can rationally and religiously remain Jewish should nevertheless culturally fit better into Germany, and he undertakes the massive process of translating the Bible into German using Hebrew letters so that Jews can learn a proper German. At the same time, he writes, and his students write, a commentary to the German Mendelssohn Bible called Biur, Illumination, in a kind of post-medieval Hebrew that becomes the basis for the linguistic revival of Hebrew in modern times. So, ironically, Mendelssohn is both responsible for Jewish acculturation in Central Europe, and at the same time laying the basis for the return of Jewish nationalism with the Hebrew language as its principal cultural vehicle. So he is of tremendous importance. He is the founder and father, so to speak, of the Haskalah, of the Jewish Enlightenment, which will continue vigorously for several generations, moving ever further to the east, where it becomes ultimately tied up with the revival of Hebrew and Yiddish-based Jewish nationalism as well. Mendelssohn does not live to see it, but the French do invade Germany, and the status solutions of France are imposed on Germany and its different principalities. They are then nullified by the Congress of Vienna, which allows the individual states to decide on Jewish status. The mood in Europe, Central Europe, had changed greatly from that of the Enlightenment, of rationalism to romanticism. It's kind of the switch from Haydn and Mozart in music to, let's say, Beethoven, and then later Brahms, where feelings and the spirit of the folk take precedence over rationalism and the kind of almost mathematical thought that goes along with that. In this very different moment now, in which you have a political reaction, political conservatism with a small c, and cultural romanticism, the questions of Jewish emancipation and cultural adaptation actually become more difficult. In the Enlightenment, the question was, how do Jews fit in with respect to being part of the universal set of human beings? Now, under Romanticism, the question becomes, if the French people are uniquely French, and if the German people are uniquely German, how could Jews be absorbed by those populations if, in the terms of their essential character as a nation, as a folk, they are different than the Germans and the French? So the Jewish question actually pivots a little bit at this point, and the consequences, as we know, are going to be quite dark in the long run. We will be discussing in the future the mechanisms by which the Jewish community in Germany, and principally Germany, but other places as well, starts to make this adjustment into the Romantic mode with a small r. One will be the Wissenschaft movement, which is the beginning of Jewish studies, what we are indulging in right here in this class, assessing Judaism not from the sacred view of Torah, but rather from history, in particular as understood in modern times as being empirical, as being developmental, adaptive, etc. And then based in part on those historical findings, the beginning of religious reform in Germany to help German Jews find a place both within Germany and within Judaism. First you get the Reform movement, the break off from it, the conservative movement, or positive historical as it's referred to in Germany, and then against both of those, vis-a-vis both of those with respect to doctrine, the rise of what might be called German modern orthodoxy under Samson Raphael Hirsch. But that carries us deep into the next few weeks of discussion. We are in a very complex and rich area of modern Jewish history. Many books about modern Jewish history actually focus on the German experience that we're now going to be studying, as we will be doing for the next few weeks. So since I'm doing this taping on my own, I hope and pray that it actually works. And once you get it, once it's available, please let me know if it happened, or whether or not I would have to redo it for your benefit. So enjoy the readings, keep up the lively discussion. I thoroughly enjoy them. I'm very glad that you are debating with one another and raising many important issues, both about the work at hand as well as the larger implications. It is okay to go long and wide once in a while, as we're doing in class. So take care, and I'll see all of you online.